Let's start and try to do a little space planning here in SketchUp. And I thought I'd do the Windows version just for a change. The first thing you'll want to do, now that I'm on the Windows version, I do need to call up my large tool set. If I go to the View pull-down menu and Toolbars, you'll see it looks a little different on the Windows side than on the Mac side. And there are a large number of tool sets, and this is actually the primary difference between the Windows and Mac versions is that the Mac version, basically you can customize your menus by dragging individual tools up to your toolbar area. On the PC version, everything is pretty much organized into these toolbars. So I'll just click Close, and here's my lovely large tool set. And by the way, you can right-click on any blank area of your toolbars and get that menu, pop-up menu. Otherwise, the menu is basically exactly the same. What I wanted to talk about next was section planes. Now, section planes slice away the model to expose the inside of the model volumes that we've created. If I click the section plane, on the PC, on the Windows version, it will allow you to name these section planes. You could just leave it as section 1, and that's probably fine. Maybe I'll call it plan, view. And it has a symbol, and this is good if you're ever using SketchUp for construction documents. Now, I think I'm going to tell it not to show me this again. I'll just use the default names. But I thought I'd show you that as a heads up. So click Place, and what you'll see, the section plane is kind of rectangle with section symbols on the corners of the rectangle. And I can use my arrow keys to orient this section plane. I'm just tapping the left arrow, the right arrow, the up arrow. Each of these will orient it towards a different plane. You can also just allow SketchUp to orient based on what it sees in terms of geometry. Once you find the angle or the reference angle that you prefer, hold down Shift and it will lock it in place. Now, I'm just going to click to place the section plane. And what you'll see in your model is this large blue box, or I'm sorry, large orange box, which you can select and move just up and down. So I'm going to bring this up pretty high. Now, one of the peculiarities of section planes is that SketchUp will fill them in with poche automatically. So we are going to need to tell it to stop doing that so that we can see inside the model. And the way that you do that is you go to the View, pull-down menu, and tell it No Section Fill. I'll just check that. And now we can see inside the model. Now, one of the cool things about section planes, besides the fact that you can select them and move them, is that they can also reside inside groups or components. You can kind of have sections within sections. So what I like to do sometimes is double click on a component. Now, in this case, I've got my column grid, and I'll show the rest of the model. But I want to cut these columns off a little lower, just for the fun of it. So I'm going to insert a second section plane, and it's facing down, so I'm going to hold down Shift to retain that orientation, and click to place it. Now, when I exit the component, you can see there's two section planes active. You can only do this when you are inside a component, but it's kind of a cool feature if you want to see a kind of cutaway view of your project. The other thing is I don't like to see these section planes actually visible. You can hide those without turning them off just by choosing the View pull-down menu and unchecking section planes. The section planes disappear, but their cutting doesn't disappear. And to get rid of that, you'll have to uncheck section cuts, and now the rest of your model shows up. So I'm going to turn that back on, obviously, so I can work. And our focus for today is to come up with a space plan layout for our project using our components browser. Really, this is just going to be a matter of coming up with objects that you can use. So for example, cafe furniture might be handy for our cafe, and you can just scroll down in the list Now, what I find is that sometimes these little icons aren't very satisfying. So now we're going to learn about these last couple of buttons up here on the main toolbar. The first one here is called the 3D Warehouse. And this is what popped up earlier when we looked for the doors. But often I will just go straight to the 3D Warehouse and type in whatever it is that I'm looking for. Cafe seating might be nice. And then you can browse through the list. And usually there are quite a few different things that you can choose. Sometimes there's whole kind of bench and chair seating. And then sometimes there's just some completely wacky stuff. So it's entirely up to you and your aesthetics. I'm going to go, and I like this one. I'm just going to click the download directly button. I could click on it and study it a little more, but I'm just going to go for it. I think it's probably going to be okay. I'll load that into my project. Now this gives me an opportunity to talk a little bit about how some of these objects are arranged when you get them off of 3D Warehouse. First of all, obviously it's a component. If I double click on it, I don't know what these are. So what I might do is view the hidden geometry and see if there's something attached to these. Now, I don't see anything, so I think I'm just going to delete them. And I'll just select them, right-click, and choose, try to right-click, and choose Erase. Nope, I guess I missed one. And again, sometimes these are just legacies of something else that was in these models. You'll also see, for example, I'm just going to hide the rest of the model, that the box which describes the limits of this component, see how it's much bigger than the actual component? So something is here, but we don't know what. You can try to select it, but in all likelihood, it's either hidden or it's entirely possible that it's on a layer that's off. So I'm going to go over to my Layers menu and see if there are any layers that are off. I don't know why this object is so large, but I guess we're just going to have to live with it. The way that you can reduce it is you could actually just select these objects, Control-C to copy, exit out of this, and then I'll paste those objects, Control-V or Command-V if you're on a Mac. And I'll just delete that because sometimes you just don't know what's in there. What you'll see is that these are actually made up, that component was made up of many other components. And the typical thing that you'll find with components is that they're often made up of sub-components. Now let's see what we've got in here. If I click on this, I see that the cushions are actually made up what appear to be another component. Now I'm going to open this new dialog box up here called the Entity Info dialog box and see if it has any information that can help me. Now all it's saying is basically these are a group. So I'll double click on that. I'm going to tap H so that I can see the rest of the model just so I don't get completely lost. And it looks to me like it's just a group with these 3 different shapes in there for cushions. So I guess we're okay. And the same with this. It appears to be another group. And within the group, there's a subgroup. And then within the subgroup, you actually get down to the original objects. Often with components, you do need to be very careful and kind of dig down to figure out how you're going to paint these things. If I wanted to paint this component, but I wanted the sides to be, say, a different material than the cushions and the back, I'm really going to have to try and understand how the thing is put together. Probably, and let me go down to my materials dialog box, and let's choose a fabric. See if we can paint these different materials. Sometimes it's just not going to work until you dig deeper. Now I'm inside here. Let's see if we can paint that. There, finally, we can paint it, okay? So as I mentioned, component painting behavior can be quite tricky. You have to dig down sometimes to find the nested components or to find the base groups that need to be painted. And let's go down here, we'll paint the base, some kind of wood material. See how it doesn't paint. I need to dig in here a little farther. I'm going to just tap H so I can see what I'm looking at. Oh, still doesn't paint, but you see how these do paint. I'm going to have to dig in even farther to paint it. Now this was a component. Notice how they all painted when I did that. For this part, maybe it's easier to just select everything and use the paint bucket now, and that will paint all surfaces. And there you go. Oh, except I missed the inside of this component. And again, you just have to keep digging till you get to the object that you want to paint. And there you go. Now, once I click out of the component, you'll see that they've all painted. And you can do this with most online objects. Another thing is, let's say I have a component, and I'll come in here and let's unhide the rest of the model. And maybe I want to paint this some other material. Let's just go with a named color for now. Choose red. See how when I finish that, that one is unique. If I wanted multiple copies of this chair, and I'll just tap the move command and control because I'm on a PC. And I'll drag this over and make a couple of copies. Now sometimes you'll have several copies, but you want one set to be red and maybe another set to be blue. What you can do, you can right click on a component and there is an option to make it unique. And what that means is now when I paint this component, I'll paint it just some other color. Now I have two components. I'm just going to make a couple of copies of this guy. And you can see that they will all change when I edit one of them. So this is a way you can kind of have a similar component but have several versions just to make life a little more interesting. So what you should do is plan out the cafe space and then leave one end of the space for a counter and service and prep area. And in my case, I think I'm going to do that over here and have my back door be available for that. Now to do that, it's probably easier to just draw the counter in kind of manually. I'm going to use lines. Now sometimes you know dimensions of things. For example, a counter is 24 inches. And I'll drag this down here and just complete the surface, and I'll push-pull it up. Now counters can be variable heights, but I'm going to go with 36 inches for now. Okay. And this is something we're going to design in greater detail later, but this is just fine for now, just choosing where it's going to be. I'm going to triple click on this object and turn it into a component, which I will call the counter. And that will, you'll see later on, will allow me to do some fancy editing tricks. Now, the last thing that we want to do, as you start adding elements in, for example, if you add carpeting or throw rugs, you will start to run into this Z-fighting that we're seeing right now. I know that I drew a rectangle on the base, and I drew a rectangle on top of the base for my glass box. I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to double-click on the base, and I'm going to delete this extra center floor. And what that means is now my floor inside this component, or inside this group, is unique. I just have to remember to paint it something other than glass, because glass is kind of an odd material for the floor. Maybe I'll go with tile. I like tile. Let's go with something a little more mellow than that. Okay, there we go. Our goal here is to get the cafe kind of space planned, put in whatever furniture that you think you need. Also, I'm just noticing that these doors are probably not in the best position here. They're right in front of these columns. Let's move those over maybe a couple of feet here, 4 feet. There we go. And, I guess that's still in front of the columns. And maybe we can use 2 of them while we're at it. There we go. That'll be my front entry. All right, and you'll want to fix this side too. Now, space planning is one area where I really do like to use layers to help organize things. All this furniture that I have, I can come in here and select it and put it all on one layer. I'm just going to grab this too. If I go to my layers menu, what you'll find, first of all, I created a layer for exterior building, but there are some other mysterious layers. These are often created as sort of sub parts of different components. So if I turn these off, and on, you may find that certain things appear or disappear. It's always kind of a mystery sometimes when you turn on and off a layer and nothing happens at all. In fact, one tricky way that you can find what layer things are on is by choosing color by layer. And then you can kind of zoom in, but again, this still doesn't tell me where that one mysterious layer is that I can't seem to figure out. All right, let's not color it by layer. But I am going to make a new layer, and just click the little plus sign, which cleverly indicates adding a layer. I'm just going to call it furniture. Okay. I'm going to select all of my furniture. Oh, I guess I did. And if you go over here to the Entity Info dialog box, and it says that I have 28 entities and they're all in layer 0. So I can just move them all in one fell swoop onto the other layer. They don't look any differently, but it does make organizing them an awful lot easier. Other tools that you may find useful as you go about your business space planning this project is that in addition to using the array tool that we learned about earlier, there also is a rotated array tool. Now, the easiest way to use that is if, let's just say I want a mirrored version of these tables that I have selected. I click the rotate command and I tap Control on a PC or Alt on a Mac, and you'll see that tiny little plus sign show up again. And that little plus sign is my favorite. It makes it so that there is a copy created. And I can just try and move these guys down a little bit. Now, other things that are helpful when you're space planning is don't click on the furniture to move it. And the reason is sometimes you can grab a piece of furniture by an endpoint, which is up high in the furniture, and accidentally move the furniture underground. And so to avoid that problem, when you want to move the furniture, just either click on some part of the furniture that's on the ground, this endpoint, or click on a piece of the ground that's not even anywhere near the furniture, and then you'll avoid kind of losing your furniture to the underground. Another thing that you can do is with your rotated array, let me just make a copy of this guy here, drag it off, is you can make a completely rotated array, not just mirroring. And again, I'll just click my rotated array tool, rotate tool, tap Control to make an array or to make a copy. Now this time I'm going to rotate this chair around, and you'll see in my value control box that it is telling me an angle, which I can change if I wanted. And then I can multiply it times 8, for example, and now I have a circle of chairs. Very handy. You might say, wow, that's great. What else can my array tool do? Well, let me make another copy here. And let's say you just want a bunch of chairs spaced evenly along the window. You can just select the chair you want, click Move, tap Control or Command on a Mac. But in this case, I'm going to drag the copy out to the end, and instead of typing times, I'm going to type slash. And then whatever number you think might fit in there. I'll type in 12. Oh, that's too many. I'll type in slash 11. Maybe slash 10 will do it. And there you go. So that's a quick way to get kind of evenly spaced objects. Now, from a design standpoint, it does often look really nice when the chairs are kind of randomly spaced. This is one last kind of space planning tool that's really handy, which is when you have the Move command activated and you've selected an object, and here's my object, click the Move command, what you'll see is that there are little tiny grips that show up on the surfaces that you are mousing over. I'll go over this mouse. See how there's these little plus signs? If I click on one of those plus signs, I can rotate the chair. Now, of course, it's kind of silly to rotate it in that direction, but obviously in this case, if I want to make it look like each chair is slightly different angled, I can just select each one, tap M for the Move command, and I can organize these in a number of different ways. So there you go, some basic space planning tools. I think I'm going to get rid of this garbage that I had from our earlier lecture because we don't really need it anymore. And now I'm hoping to fill out the rest of this space with chairs, tables, flexible seating, and of countertop. One other cool thing, or at least I think it's cool, maybe not everybody else does, is you can swap components that are in your project. And we could swap out any of the furniture, but I'm going to double click on these columns here, and so that I can edit the group and then find one of the columns. I'm going to right click on it, and there's a special option here under the 3D warehouse to reload the component. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means you can open up the 3D warehouse, find some column. I'm going to use a Doric column because I think that's the traditional size here, or traditional style. And when you're in the, you should look for columns that don't have too many, that aren't too big. So for example, some of these, you can see this is 352 kilobytes. This one's 996. That's a lot of bytes. What you'll want to do is find one that's not too bad, but also actually looks like what you want it to in your project. I think I'm going to go with one that does not have base to it. Let's go here. I believe these sit directly on the ground. You can see here that it has swapped out all of my columns. Now the only problem is that the height might be wrong. See how the height is not exactly right. To change that, you can actually use the scale command, and I'm just going to edit the component and then come up, click the scale command, and I can drag this up to where it should be, and they all change. So that's a really nice and quick way to kind of modify your project and gussy it up with nicer looking columns. Now, the only trick is, of course, if you've changed this with a component that is slightly off position from the other one, you'll want to come and modify the position. It does seem like there's something a little odd about this component here, but maybe it just needs to be moved over ever so slightly. I don't know. Let's see. That might just do it. Maybe the center line of the component was just off a little bit. Anyway, there you go. A very quick way to have a really dramatic impact. But also, if you have a piece of furniture that you've just thrown in there as kind of a proxy for the real furniture, and you don't have time to search for it, and then a week later you find that perfect couch or light fixture or whatever, you can quickly swap it out. But so that's the big goal, is to try and get the cafe planned out and submit that as your assignment.